Saturday Slate DFS type stuff. But yeah, Dave told me that he actually, like, you kind of got him into like the Twitter sphere, right?
Yeah. I was doing some editing on the NBA news desk when he was first joining Fantasy Pros, so we kind of worked together for a little bit doing that.
That's chill. Sounds like fun. He said that you were kind of like one of his, top mentors. So it's kind of funny. I reached out to him. I didn't know that you guys knew each other. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, is that guy that works over there at Fantasy Pros? And he's like, yeah, me and him are actually like really tight. So yeah, that worked out. Definitely worked out.
Yeah. Appreciate you having me, man.
No, anytime. We're about to get this show kicked off. Let's go ahead and start it with the theme. Oop, if I have it. It's in here somewhere. I forgot that we added in a whole bunch of stuff for our shows. Cool.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
What's going on, guys? Welcome on into, another episode of Fantasy Intervention. We have on the slate with us we have on the docket for us the Saturday slate for the wildcard playoff games. And I'm really excited to be diving into this after, a rough day for a lot of people. And it was very unfortunate with what happened. Definitely not something that, definitely not something that I was proud of by any stretch of the imagination with everything going on. So, thoughts and prayers got there for everybody that was affected, which I'm sure a lot of people actually were affected, not just, emotionally and, physically, but mentally as well. So, following the show, we're actually going to go out and we're going to reach out to quite a few people. I have a few different pods that I plan on going on tonight to talk about some of the injustices that are going on. So I'm going to save those conversations for then. But for now, we do have our Saturday slate, something that I wanted to dive into to make sure the patrons that, constantly support the show get their content that we promise, for them every single week. And I had to bring Zach on with me. What's going on, Zach? How you doing, man?
What's going on, brother? Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. Heard you're a whiz kid over there, man. Heard you know your DFS.
Yeah, I know a little bit of DFS. Hopefully got some intelligent things to say. We'll see.
No, Dave had a lot of good things to say about you, man. So I'm excited to actually dive into this episode. You want to let everybody know where to find you before we do that?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Zach the Monster.
Sounds good. And then, who do you write for? Like, what's going on over there? Who do you provide content for? What do you do for the fantasy football community?
So at Fantasy Pros, this was my first year contributing to the expert consensus rankings, did player notes for them, covered the NFC North as far as game recaps, and I did 3 weekly articles for them throughout the season. Hopefully be back doing similar work with them next season as well.
Sounds good to me, man. Looking forward to that, of course. I have read a couple of your articles, man, so good stuff. Appreciate it. Normally with like DFS, right, on larger scales, I like to find my stacks and build off my higher end stacks. Like I want to find a quarterback with a wide receiver, maybe 2 wide receivers, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, wide receiver, running back, like that kind of combination. And I want to place my stacks in place before I go and try and find studs to fit into my lineup and whatnot. But the thing with this is like with these smaller slates, stacks are pretty much going to be straight up chalk as it is. And there are other players that are going to be chalk, but I actually like to find my studs first. Like I want my guaranteed points. I want to build it with some studs, and then I want to build around there, and I'll figure out what kind of stacks and whatnot I actually will adjust to. Does that make any sense?
Makes a lot of sense to me, man. And I think you hit it on the head for this slate. This to me is kind of more of a stars and scrubs kind of slate than just a well-balanced, across the board type of slate. So I'm right there with you on this one. And
these Saturday matchups, man, like they are not. Like these Saturday matchups, like this is not good. This is not a great DFS type matchup unless you want to sit there and you want to talk for an hour about the Bills and the Colts game. Like these other two games are absolutely brutal, so you're going to be left with a bunch of chalk. Meanwhile, like Sunday Slate is sexy, man. Like they have sleepers all over the place. I'm excited for it. We're going to be covering that tomorrow at 6 o'clock. I cannot wait to cover this Sunday Slate. But the Saturday one, man, I kind of had to fight through. I kind of had to figure out who I wanted to play, who I wanted to fade, and, who was going to actually make me money. So as I sit there and I dove into it, I, of course, did have to start with the chalkier matchups, right? Like I don't want to sit there and say, hey, I got to, fade this game completely. So my first stud, right, that I actually wanted to play was Jonathan Taylor, who is heating up big time. I mean, he has at least 19.4 fantasy points in 5 straight games and at least 100 yards and or a touchdown in each of the last 6. He's had an easier schedule. He really has. But, I mean, he still did well up against Pittsburgh, right? I mean, the Bills, they've been relatively good about stopping the wide receivers, but they've been porous up against the running back, allowing 1 touchdown per game to the position, along with 96.44 yards on the ground, 5.38 receptions, 41.38 yards in the air. And honestly, like that's bottom 10 in fantasy points allowed to the position. Meanwhile, they've only faced one. They've only faced one top 12 running back on the season. I mean, the game script, like they've been winning, so I don't know how the running backs are actually getting these yards on the ground. And I don't know, man. Like, how are you feeling about this?
I'll tell you what, man, I'm big on Taylor this week as well. Like you mentioned, he's been hot. Kind of a guy that we wrote off mid-season. He had a few duds in a row, and everybody was kind of, calling him a bust prematurely. And like you mentioned, 7 touchdowns over the last 4 games, 253 freaking yards in that season finale. I mean, the dude's just been an absolute stud. So I'm playing him this week. I don't see how you cannot. And I believe I believe Indy is, let's see here. It's 52.5 point over under. So, I mean, like you said, this sexy. It's sexy. It's the marquee matchup of the day. There's going to be a lot of points scored. And honestly, to kind of counteract Josh Allen and what he can do, I really think Indy's going to rely on that run game, which is kind of what they've done to get themselves into the playoffs in the first place. So I'm playing JT all the way this week. That's the number one stud for me as well.
It just makes like way too much sense for this to actually, work itself out. I mean, the Chiefs and Packers are the only 2 teams who have a winning record that have allowed more points to the position than the Bills. So Jonathan Taylor for me is my number 1 lock. I'm going to be playing him everywhere. He'll probably be in close to like 80% of my lineups, to be honest with you. Now, sitting there and looking at it on the other side, right, we have Stephon Diggs, who's been a wide receiver 1 since week 13, right? He's been a wide receiver 2 or the wide receiver 2 since week 9, and he's been the wide receiver 3 since week 1. So we can see this chemistry, start to develop between Diggs and Josh Allen. And honestly, like I feel like it's only getting better. We still don't know what's going to happen with Cole Beasley. I don't believe yet. Like we expect him to play, but I don't think he's been ruled in or out. So if he's not playing, right, this actually makes it even sexier because the Colts struggle up against the slot position, and we know that Diggs will actually alternate into the slot from time to time. He plays about 25% of the slot so far in the year. We could see an uptick to maybe 35% or so. So I actually really like Stephon Diggs, whether Cole Beasley plays or not, but I like him even more if he plays. Xavier Rhodes tends to struggle up against players who have a little bit more speed and agility rather than size because he is so physical. I think that we could see a big performance out of Stephon Diggs. How are you feeling about Diggs?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing else to say. Led the league in receptions, led the league in receiving yards. I mean, just a complete stud all around. Again, we're going to eat the chalk on this one, right? I mean, I'm not sure who else do you pivot to at wide receiver that's really going to give you this kind of floor and this kind of ceiling. I know he's been limited this week, I think, with an oblique injury at practice, so it's something to keep an eye on. It's nothing too serious, I don't think. But,
I think it's just going to be something that they brush off. They're just putting him on the injury report right now to give a little bit more probability, or I guess, questionability towards where they end up going with this, with the starters. But I think he's playing.
Yeah, I do too, and I'm with you. I'm locking him in 8.7. $1,000. You have to.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, we're sitting there and we're looking at Stephon Diggs. Let me pull this back up. We're looking at Stephon Diggs over there. Let's see. Yeah, the Colts are 21st in explosive pass plays allowed. Meanwhile, the Bills have the second highest explosive pass play rate in the league. So with Diggs having the 5th most receptions in the NFL of over 20 yards, I think that Diggs is a smash play. Let's go ahead and jump over to another wide receiver, right? You said that you don't know about, pivoting to another guy, but honestly, I feel like Godwin's a lock for me. I mean, whether Evans plays or not, you attack Washington by attacking Jimmy Moreland in the slot when it comes to the passing game. Even the running game, you really can't run against them. So you attack Washington by hitting Jimmy Moore. I mean, Jimmy Moore has been good, but with the volume that gets directed his way, he has trouble sometimes. I mean, he has his moments of brilliance, but overall, he's still struggling when it comes to the overall rating. Teams just feed him right off the bat. Part of that has to do with forcing the quarterback to get rid of the ball quickly without blitzing, by the way. Washington does not have a very high blitz percentage. They rush 4 a lot of time, sometimes 5. But that ends up blocking up that second level and that third level. So with that being said, they end up hitting the slot guy a whole bunch. And Jimmy Moreland, yeah, he struggles to an extent. But Chris Godwin, he almost exclusively lines up out of the slot position. So I'm sitting there and I'm loving Chris Godwin. Loving Chris Godwin. How do you feel about Chris Godwin overall? Is he somebody that you feel as confident as I do playing?
I can get on board with Godwin for sure. I mean, like you mentioned, he's going to be lining up in the slot. He's coming into the playoffs pretty hot. He scored 4 touchdowns over his last 3 games. Obviously, he's getting involved. And, we saw Mike Evans' non-contact injury, tweaked his leg. Really wasn't pleasant to watch. So we're not sure if he's going to be playing or not. Even if he plays, I like Godwin. But a cheaper option I think you could also look at is, maybe not going to be getting as much slot work, but Antonio Brown, season high 15 targets in the season finale, also 4 touchdowns across his last 3 games. So I like both of those guys in this one. I lean a little bit more towards Antonio Brown just because of the price tag, but definitely can get behind Godwin as well.
I actually did a study on the Washington football team and their deep explosive pass plays allowed, which is pass plays of over 20 yards. And I ended up going into every single play that they've allowed. And then I was like, wait, they're actually giving up a lot of plays of over 40 yards and over 50 yards, but they're not allowing a lot of plays over 20 yards. So essentially, it's weird. They're something like, at the time that I did the study, they allowed the 4th least amount of plays over 20 yards, but almost every single one of them went for over 40 or 50. So I went and did a whole bunch of teams, ended up finding out that Washington allowed the 2nd most passing plays of over 40 yards and the most pass plays of over 50 yards while having the 4th least amount of plays over 20 yards. So essentially, Washington, they play this, kind of tight zone. When I look into it, they play this kind of, not tight zone, but they don't end up covering over the top as much. So if Washington gets beat by the corners, the wide corners, they're getting beat. They're done. So Antonio Brown does make some sense as more of a flyer type position, because if he can get behind there, he could end up having some big time plays, which is what he's being used as right now for Tampa Bay. So although I do like Antonio Brown, he's not a lock for me, but he could end up having that big time week that actually wins you something. Still, I'm going with Chris Godwin, and Chris Godwin in the slot role that he plays actually made me look into Rob Gronkowski a little bit more. Rob Gronkowski made sense looking at it first. Washington has never really been good at tight ends against tight ends since week 5. But Washington wasn't very good to start out the year against tight ends. And overall, their ranking is kind of deceptive because they've been really good up against tight ends since week 5. Only 2 tight ends have had over 50 yards receiving, and only 2 tight ends have had a touchdown up against Washington. That's since week 5. None of those did them both at the same time. So it's not like you're getting a ton of upside from tight ends, even if you do find one that gets a touchdown or gets over 50 yards. It's just, not going to be a massive game. So The schedule wasn't insane. It was overall a pretty good schedule for him. But Gronk, for me, is a little bit of a different animal, but still. Single-digit fantasy points, 5 out of the past 8 games. In addition, he's only had 6 or more receptions in 2 games so far this season. So sitting there and looking at it, I'd rather have the consistency of the tight end on the other side of the field who we're about to talk about rather than try and chasing the upside with Gronkowski. Is Gronkowski somebody that you could see yourself playing this week, or are you going to fade him?
I'm fading it, man. Like you mentioned, we're about to talk about Logan Thomas, and there's also some other options that are a bit cheaper that I would like to save some money on. Gronk kind of falls in that no man's land where I'm not willing to pay up for him. I'll pay a little bit more for Thomas, but I'd much rather save some money if I'm not going to go chalk with Thomas. So I'm fading Gronk.
I mean, he's not that expensive. I believe actually Logan Thomas is a K more than Gronkowski, if I remember correctly. But sitting there and looking at Logan Thomas, I mean, I feel like he's going to smash. His consistency has been insane, right?
Absolutely, man.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, so 6 straight games of double-digit points, including 3 of them, coming against the first, the second, and the 9th best teams up against this tight end so far on the season. He's averaging 16 points per game during that span. Let me go ahead and repeat that one more time. 6 straight games of double-digit points, including 3 of them coming up against the first, the second, and the 9th best teams up against the tight end. And he's still averaging in that 6-game span over 16 points per game. That's insane. The Bucs aren't very good up against the tight end. 3 touchdowns allowed in the past 4 games and 9 so far in the season. They're 23rd ranked overall. Their schedule against tight end, hasn't been brutal. But Logan Thomas is putting out big time. So I really love Logan Thomas in this one. He is 1K more than Gronk, like I was talking about. So I actually do expect a little bit lower ownership because I think people are going to gravitate towards Gronk and gravitate towards lower options on the slate because I think we're going to have a lot of people that are playing that Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Jonathan Taylor stack, and they're going to be forced to fade the tight ends. So I'm thinking that Logan Thomas is going to not be chalk. How are you feeling about Logan Thomas? Do you think he's going to be chalky? How are you feeling?
I have a feeling he's going to be chalky. I mean, just because of the consistency that you mentioned, I think Gronk will probably be popular just because of the name. But Thomas just makes so much sense for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, he was a top 5 fantasy tight end this year. He's a great red zone target. And Tampa Bay, they're a top 10 team for most points allowed to the position this season. And as you mentioned, he's succeeded against tougher matchups, and this is just a golden matchup. I think quarterback play kind of comes into this one as well. You don't know who's going to be under center. You don't know, if it's going to be Alex Smith. If he's not able to go, I feel like Washington's probably going to be looking to check the ball down a good bit, looking for that safety valve. And Thomas just definitely fits that role. I think he makes so much sense this week.
Once again, he's one of my smash plays, even though he is a K more than Gronk. Now, I mean, honestly, it's like, what other tight ends are you going to play? Higbee, right, who has 3 weeks of double-digit points on the whole entire season, right? We don't know what's going on with Goff, and they don't really throw it in the red zone anyways. Plus, Seattle shut him down. I mean, Knox can make some sense. The Colts have been kind of shaky over the past 4 weeks. I mean, Knox is finding his way, but, Seattle's and Indy's tight ends, they're going to cannibalize each other. So I just don't see another tight end that's, like, sexy,
No, this it's all none of it's sexy, none of it's attractive after Thomas. Gerald Everett, makes a little bit of sense after Higbee. I mean, he actually finished the season with 2 more targets than Higbee. He's going to be a bit cheaper. Maybe you go him. I think if Beasley's out, Knox is a guy that could get some looks. He had season high 8 targets in week 17. That might make a little bit of sense. Isaiah McKenzie might not play for Buffalo as well. So if both of those guys are out, I think Knox is probably the only safe option really after Thomas and Gronk.
Yeah, I just don't see it. Knox makes sense, but I think that Thomas is the only lock on this slate for the tight end position.
For sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's talk about the stacks we're going to do, right? Because, I mean, there's one that's obvious, right?
It's Allen Diggs.
Chalk, right? Yeah. Allen Diggs. And then you run it back with Taylor, who we already talked about. So, like, how are you feeling about Josh Allen? I'm going to let you go ahead and start this one out. Like, how are you feeling about Josh Allen? Do you think he's going to end up, performing? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think for this slate, quarterback is so tough. The matchups are brutal. There's a lot of injuries, Goff and Washington's quarterback situation, the tough matchups, Russell Wilson with the Rams, Allen and Indy. That's not a super tough matchup, but it's not a great matchup either. So it's kind of falls in the middle a little bit, but the 52.5 point over under is what we're going to go for. Allen played at an MVP level this year, top scoring fantasy quarterback. You're looking for upside. I mean, so if I'm spending $9,000, I want a guy that can scramble. I want a guy that can, run for some yards, punch it in the red zone, make some big plays all around. And that's who I'm going with. I think he's definitely the lock. Now, as we mentioned, I really think Diggs ends up playing, but if for some reason he doesn't, and Beasley's out, I'm not spending the money on Allen. I'm not spending $9,000 if he has no receivers as talented as he is. But assuming everybody's all go, I'm paying up for him. I think if you don't eat that chalk, you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, you're trying to catch up with it, and honestly, like, sitting there and looking at it, like, it's one way to get contrarian for sure. Like, maybe Josh Allen could bomb, and all of a sudden, like, you knock out 80% of the field.
Yeah.
Like, I'll have a couple lineups where I'm not going to be playing him, but I'm not recommending that, people. I'm not recommending you go out and you fade Josh Allen. Like, but at the same time, you don't want every single lineup to consist of Josh Allen, in my opinion, especially in tournaments. Maybe in cash, sure, but in tournaments, no. Like, you can't run against the Colts, right? Derrick Henry's the only running back to get more than 72 yards against him. And I believe in that week, DeForest Buckner was hurt. DeForest Buckner should be playing this week. So even if they are up, Allen still throws. Like, I can't find a reason to not play Josh Allen. I can't find a reason. I think the way that you get away with playing Josh Allen is by not playing Diggs. And I still, like I said, I love Diggs. I'm going to have him in a whole bunch of lineups. But, man, like, sitting there and looking at Diggs and possibly seeing that John Brown could actually get the long bond opportunities, right? If Cole Beasley plays, he could get the volume, maybe the touchdowns. We talked about Knox earlier. Maybe Knox gets the touchdowns, and Stephon Diggs just doesn't pay off his value. I don't think that happens once again, but it's still got to be a possibility, right?
For sure.
All right, well, yeah, no, I know you're not buying that either. So I'm trying to come up with ways as to how you can win this lineup without having the same lineup as everybody else, and how you can win this lineup without having just pure chalk, like, and then going with like flyer after flyer after flyer. Because honestly, there's not too many flyers in this matchup that I actually trust. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm fading Brady. I know that. 7 games so far this year up against the top 15 defense. 1 finish with over 20 points, and that was week 1. Washington's only allowed 5 quarterbacks to get double-digit points, and 2 of them did it with their legs. Like, that's absolutely insane, right? Like, I mean, are you playing Brady?
I'm not playing Brady, man. Again, I got to agree with you here. It's a tough matchup for quarterbacks. Washington's favored by almost 9 points. I think that really sets up well for Ronald Jones and Tampa Bay defense stack for me, rather than Brady. I really think Tampa Bay just eats the clock, grinds the ball, and relies on defense and
short yardage passing.
Yep. Lets Brady kind of hang back a little bit and get ready for the big guys, once they get past this week, because this is an easy win, I think, for Tampa Bay.
Oh, I actually disagree with this. So Brady's actually 44% completion percentage while getting pressured. And like we talked about earlier, Washington constantly pressures the quarterback. Meanwhile, their average depth of target when he gets pressured is something like 5.4 yards per target. So, like, he absolutely struggles under pressure. And with the Washington football team and how they play their zone and how they don't bring the blitz, Brady actually struggles when teams actually can get pressure on them without bringing the blitz. So this is something as to where I think that Brady could actually struggle this week. And that's actually why I'm fading him versus thinking that it could be just a runaway. I actually love Washington's defense in this, and I normally don't talk about the defenses. As for Russell Wilson, I'm fading him. Right? He hasn't gotten over 20 points against the Rams since Ramsey came to town. Prior to that, he was putting up 30-point games like all the time, and he hasn't crossed 20 since Ramsey came in. He's only eclipsed 20 points once since week 12 so far this year. Like, I don't trust Russell Wilson. Do you trust Russell? Like, do you want to stack him?
I think if I'm going contrarian here, I don't know. I think the Wilson and Lockett stack is pretty intriguing. I don't want to play DK Metcalf because of the Jalen Ramsey factor, as you mentioned. So I kind of like Lockett to operate as a target favorite for Wilson.
Okay.
It depends on who's in at quarterback. If Goff is out this week, or if he's limited, I mean, he has that thumb injury, so I don't think he's going to be playing at his best regardless. Seattle's defense has been, superb over the last, 5 or 6 weeks. They've just been excellent. Despite, slow start, I really think that the defense could set up Wilson to maybe, have some good field position, maybe come in and have a good game. Of course, how Wilson performs in the playoffs and in big spots. I don't think it's crazy to play him as a contrarian stack. He's not a cash game guy for me for sure, but if you're playing in tournaments and kind of want to pivot a little bit, I'm okay with Wilson.
Wilson makes sense. I mean, I don't really like Russell Wilson. Big shout out, by the way, to Troy, who's in the house. I'm not a huge fan of Russell Wilson, the Tyler Lockett stack myself. I mean, Tyler Lockett hasn't put up over like 11 or 12 fantasy points up against the Seahawks so far this year. So I don't know if I can get on board that completely, but it makes sense as a contrarian play because Tyler Lockett is the third highest priced receiver on the slate. Meanwhile, Russell Wilson, he's the third highest quarterback, but he's not uber expensive. Like, he's not priced up like you're looking at with Josh Allen. He's $900 cheaper or so. So sitting there looking at the factors of this, I could actually see how Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett could make sense as a contrarian play. And although at their pricing, you're going to have to get like 20 points essentially out of Lockett with the other options on the slate, it does make sense. I don't want to sit there and recommend to play it, but I might have one lineup with those guys in it because honestly, DK Metcalf, all it takes is one shot. And he actually had Ramsey burned, by the way, on one of the plays. I think it was not this past game, but the game before that. But it's something that definitely, like, I'm not going to be building the majority of my lineups around this, even as a contrarian play, where I actually love to play contrarian plays. I love to hit on those. Because when you hit big on contrarian plays. All right, so let's go ahead and let's bounce over to Goff. I don't feel comfortable with Goff. Like, I don't feel comfortable with his volume. He doesn't pass in the red zone. He's got a hurt thumb. Are you playing Goff as a stack?
Not a chance, man. The thumb injury, the Seattle defense. I know Goff plays better on the road, but I can't trust that volume. And, kind of having your hand healthy is important for a quarterback, I would think. So I'm not playing him at all.
If he comes out and he says that he's feeling great, his thumb's great, I might stick him in a couple lineups just because they could be down possibly. But honestly, this could be a very low-scoring game.
Yep.
Like, people are sitting there and they're talking about how Washington football team and stuff, versus Tampa Bay is going to be a low-scoring game. But field position could play a major factor in the Washington football team versus Tampa Bay, which could allow each team to be in scoring position. Meanwhile, Tom Brady, he turns the ball over when he plays good defenses. And we all know Washington turns the ball over from time to time in the passing game. So, as long as Alex Smith isn't playing the whole game, which it seems like Heineke is, at least going to mix in there. So sitting there and looking at it, like, I think field positions could actually help the scoring of this Washington-Tampa Bay game. Meanwhile, I don't know if that's the case because, Russell Wilson can run for first downs from time to time. Normally with the Rams, they actually get in short third down positions. So that's why Goff hasn't passed as much this year, is because they're getting in these third and short. So sitting there and looking at it, I think I have to fade Goff just because I think that it's going to be very slow moving, like just drag it out type game like you were talking about with Washington, Tampa Bay. So sitting there and looking at the Washington football team, Alex Smith could be a fun contrarian play, at his price. But now we just saw that Heineke, could get some snaps too, since I actually wrote the show sheet. So sitting there and looking at it, like, I don't I don't love the Alex Smith play, obviously. I think he's a major fade. And then Wolford, he makes it interesting if he's playing. Like, I'll play him in a lineup or two, but I'm not going to be rolling him out or anything like that. So, I mean, I think that, like, there's only one other option in this DFS that we talked about. I mean, I know that you like Russell Wilson, but there's one person we left out at the quarterback position, and that's Phillip Rivers. I don't love it. He hasn't hit 300 yards since week 10. And that week, he only threw one touchdown. So it's very similar to the Washington defense where, if they allow a touchdown, they don't allow 50 yards and vice versa. So, it's sitting there and looking at, like, Rivers' upside could be very limited, but at the same time, this could be a shootout game. He's probably going to have low ownership. We're sitting there, we're looking at his pricing on DraftKings, and what is he sitting at over here? God, he's the fifth. He's behind Jared Goff. He's 5,400. He's 2,100 less than Josh Allen. Do you have any faith in Phillip Rivers?
Sure. I mean, sure. I mean, again, I think he makes the most, as you mentioned. I'm in agreement with you here. I think he makes the most sense, further down the line. He's only had 3 games this year, with at least 20 fantasy points. 2 of those came against Cincinnati and Detroit. So I'm not really thrilled about the upside. This is a team focused on the run game, right? They got a great offensive line. They got a great stable of running backs. He's been 6 weeks without hitting that 20 fantasy point mark. So the upside is really, it's not there for me right now. But as you mentioned, the high over under, it could potentially turn into a shootout. If Michael Pittman's, doing good, if Zach Paschall's, playing well, T.Y. Hilton gets a couple of big plays, maybe Naim Heinz, runs a screen pass in or something, Rivers he has that potential to maybe hit and be a great contrarian option. So I'm with you in that regard.
I mean, we're talking about stacks, right? So, like, if you're not going Josh Allen, you want to fade Josh Allen in some of your lineups. I think that Phillip Rivers makes the most sense to create your stack around. Try and go a little bit contrarian. And honestly, I think that he's probably going to have less ownership than Russell Wilson.
For sure.
Okay, so we're on the same page as that. I'm guessing right around maybe 10%. So sitting there and looking at it, we have to figure out who we want to stack with this guy because Tre'Davious White, he's going to be shadowing T.Y. Hilton. And White is very, very talented up against receivers that have T.Y. Hilton's skill set. Like, Tre'Davious White struggles up against DK Metcalf type guys, bigger, more physical, because Tre'Davious White's like all of 5'10" or something like that. Right. He struggles up against bigger, more physical guys. Meanwhile, he thrives up against guys like T.Y. Hilton. So if we are going to play Rivers, I am fading T.Y. Hilton. I have Taylor locked in with Rivers. And honestly, I wish that Paris Campbell was playing so bad because this would be such a massive Paris Campbell game. Like, he'd probably be the highest ownership that I had of any player. Paris Campbell would be. But we don't. We have Zach Paschall, who's seen a decent amount of volume. He can get you a touchdown. I mean, he's seen 3 touchdowns over the past 3 weeks and 37, right? He can make some of these amazing type lineups work, where you can play Taylor, Godwin, Stephon Diggs, and still have room for Zach Paschall. Sitting there and looking at it like, I like Zach Paschall, and I like Pittman too. Pittman's 200 less. Although it makes me nervous rolling the dice on Pittman in a bunch of lineups, out there without the volume, I still think he can get in the end zone. Levi Wallace is good, but Pittman makes me nervous. I think I'm going to go Zach Paschall. How are you feeling about the receivers in this?
Paschall is probably my favorite as well, just because he's not going to have that Tre'Davious White shadow. I still think that Hilton is a viable option if you're looking for, again, low ownership play in tournaments, just because of the shadow corner factor. It really just takes one big play for him, and he finished the season hot, as you know. But
he's only at 5K, by the way, just for record, just so everybody knows. He's only at 5K, which is actually a lot cheaper than I realized he was at. So maybe I won't fade T.Y. Hilton as hard, but still makes me a little bit nervous.
Makes me nervous too. He's not a favorite play of mine, but if you're looking for that, deep playability in tournaments, but if you're looking for the safer stack, I think Paschall's probably going to be your guy.
I'll take that. I'll take that as a compliment. I'll roll with it. All right, so let's go ahead. We got our stack, we're not rolling with Jonathan Allen, Josh Allen. And we're sitting there, we're going to go with Phillip Rivers as contrarian play. We're going to roll with Zach Paschall. But, I still want to feel good about this, the stack with, God, I hate saying this, with Rivers. So, are we going to play a tight end? Because the weakness for Buffalo has been the tight end position all season long. And none have really been relevant since the middle of the season. They're not getting targeted or anything like that. So let's just say that you're having a 6 stack, right? And you have Phillip Rivers in there. You've got Stephon Diggs. You've got Chris Godwin, maybe even Jonathan Taylor, because this game could be that high scoring. It really could be, as to where you could play probably 4 Colts and 3 Bills and still be okay. So sitting there and looking at it, would you play in these tight ends? And if you do, are you leaning Jack Doyle because he's getting, the snaps? Are you leaning Burton as the move tight end? I mean, the inline tight end has actually been the one that's producing better up against the Bills. How are you feeling about this?
Yeah, so Buffalo's been a great matchup for tight ends, allowed the most receptions to the position, 5.8, second most yards, over 62. So tight ends have really thrived against them, as you mentioned. Burton's seen about 50% more targets this season than Doyle, and he's got the touchdown upside. I think he even ran one in earlier, in the season on some sort of end around. So Burton, for me, if I had to pick, is going to be my guy. If I'm playing a Indianapolis, tight end, I'm not a fan of doing that. Let me ask you: would you? And this might sound just completely off the wall. Would you consider a Rivers, Taylor, and Heinz stack? Would you consider stacking 2 running backs just because of Heinz' pass catching ability rather than a tight end?
You're cheating. You're cheating. You're looking at my show sheet and you're picking my flyer. So here's the deal. I wouldn't play just the 2 running backs with Rivers. I think that you have to sit there and you have to go with one of the wide receivers or the tight ends. But on the next part of our segment, we have the dart throws or the flyers or whatever the hell you want to call them, right? The shots in the dark. These are guys that, nobody else is really going to be playing, where they're cheaper options and they can make your lineups work. And we're going to need some strong dart throws. And they're not there because the Josh Allen lineups, it's pretty much going to be like Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and then trying to fit in Jonathan Taylor, trying to fit in Chris Godwin, and it's not going to work. So we've got a couple guys on this list that can make it happen. Zach Paschall, who we already talked about, is one of them. But the next one was Naim Heinz. And even with Taylor being the guy for Indy, Naim Heinz still has a similar role. Not the role that we're talking about that he started out with the season, but he has a similar role to Danny Woodhead, Austin Eckler, and pretty much every other pass catcher that had Phillip Rivers at quarterback. So sitting there and looking at it, it's not really popping off the page necessarily, but it definitely was something that kind of stunned me. His red zone usage has been nuts. He has 3+ carries in 4 of the past 6 weeks, and at least 2 carries and or targets in 7 of the last 8. He's getting red zone usage, and it's absolutely nuts. On the season, he has the 7th most red zone targets for the running back position. Combine his receptions with carries in the red zone, and that gives him the 16th most red zone opportunities for the running back position. He has 39.8 opportunity share as a whole in the red zone. So sitting there and looking at his opportunity share, and seeing that he has 40% chance to get a touch in the red zone, that's really sick. That's awesome. So he is absolutely a flyer for me. And with the majority of the ownership being on Taylor, Naim Heinz makes sense to play him with Taylor as contrarian play or without Taylor as a contrarian play. So, keep in mind that even throughout his breakout, when it comes to Jonathan Taylor, even throughout Jonathan Taylor's breakout, he still has double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games. By the way, right, in a game where they could be down up against the Bills, it makes too much sense to not play Naim Heinz. And the last line in this sentence is, I'd even consider playing the 2 running backs together. So to answer your question, yes.
And I promise I didn't look at that part in your sheet, man. I was just genuinely curious.
No, that was great. That was a perfect segue because I literally wanted to go on a rant about that, and you brought me right into it in the perfect way possible.
All right.
Yes, you can play Naim Heinz with Jonathan Taylor this week, but if you're going to play Phillip Rivers as the stack option, I would probably play wide receiver as well, or I would fade Jonathan Taylor. But I don't recommend fading Jonathan Taylor because he's a lock for me. Now, do you have anything to add for Naim Heinz?
I think you hit it on the head, man. I think the game script is just going to be a big thing. Buffalo's favored by almost a touchdown. It's going to be supposedly going to be a high-scoring game. And, I mean, honestly, we saw Buffalo hang 56 on Miami, which was, I mean, that was a great defense all season long. So when Buffalo's rolling, man, they can roll. So I think that would set things up for Hines to get in as a pass catcher if they're down big. So.
It makes so much sense. Like, just sitting there and looking at it. And somebody else that makes a lot of sense. And, a lot of people are going to be like, it depends on the situation, depends on the quarterback and everything like that. But I don't think it does as much as Josh Reynolds. Now, Josh Reynolds came in last week, and with the backup quarterback Wolford back there, not Tyler Johnson, Van Jefferson, I think outshined him, if I remember correctly. But looking at Josh Reynolds' games up against Seattle Seahawks, and keep in mind Josh Reynolds is at like 3,700, I believe. Up against Seattle, 13 fantasy points in week 16, and then 17.4 fantasy points in week 10. So in both weeks, he significantly outperformed his projected price total, as they say, for DraftKings. Sitting there at 4K, you're expecting to get about 12 fantasy points or so, maybe a little bit less than that, maybe like the 10 range. But sitting there, like, he could absolutely eclipse that, no problem. So are we sitting – 3,600, by the way, not 37. So sitting there and looking at it, like, is Josh Reynolds a possible play for you in up against the Seattle defense that's been terrible in the secondary? And the guy that, they'll probably be ignoring a little bit more often.
Yeah, I circled him as one of my value plays. 2 games against Seattle this season, 14 receptions, 159 receiving yards. Definitely 8 against Seattle this season. As you mentioned, they're going to probably be focused. The defense is probably going to be focused on Kupp, going to be focused on Woods, and Reynolds is going to be your odd man out as he's been all season long. So I definitely like him as a value here.
Do you have anybody else that can be a value? Because I struggled, man. I went through everybody. Like Cam Sims was interesting, for me, just because you could see a little bit of volume. Terry McLaurin getting a lot of attention. Cam Sims isn't like, I don't feel safe with him with the quarterbacks that play. If Alex Smith plays a whole ton, then guess what? He's not going to see the targets downfield, which is how they're going to use him this week. If Heineke sees it, like he targeted Heineke with 3 targets in 1 quarter in the last game they played, but I believe either all 3 were incomplete or 2 were, he didn't complete all of them. They weren't very accurate overall. So sitting there looking at it, like, did you find somebody in this slate that nobody else is playing?
So I got a couple guys. I'm not sure if nobody's going to be playing them, but one of my favorite plays on this slate's got to be Gabriel Davis. I tend to play on FanDuel more, so he's 5K on there. I'm not sure what he is on DraftKings. But
I miss FanDuel so much. I miss it.
Yeah.
I got put in with the experts league because I won too much money last year. And to be honest with you, I cannot stand DraftKings. Like when it comes to their disperse of cash. So or disperse of winnings. So dude, FanDuel was so much fun for me and I love it. DraftKings, I'm still kind of getting used to, but I'm catching on. But Gabriel Davis at 4K, it's interesting. Like what, with Cole Beasley potentially coming back, are you still going to play him?
So if Beasley's out, Davis to me is going to see a lot of exposure in my lineups. If Beasley plays, it's going to be, because John Brown's back. So, that leaves Davis probably, 4th in the pecking order. Probably not going to be a good play. But if Beasley's out, Davis is a lock for me. He scored one fewer touchdown than Stephon Diggs this season, which I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to as a rookie. 17.1 yards per reception. He's a big play waiting to happen. He popped off for his first 100-yard game of the season in week 17. He's coming in hot. He's cheap. Might see some extra opportunities, high-scoring game. He's a dude that I'm going to have a lot of exposure to if Beasley's out. I love Gabriel Davis this week.
I will say, by the way, that Cole Beasley did not practice Wednesday at all, not even limited. So he's still not looking right. That makes it even tougher to an extent because, as he doesn't practice more and more, I feel like ownership's going to keep going up on Davis. So is he going to be that much of a dart throw at that point, or do you think his ownership's going to be pretty high?
It might drive his ownership up a little bit. I think that's probably a good point. I'm not sure how much John Brown is on DraftKings as well. He's too much
47. More.
So, sub 5,000 price tag. I don't think either of those guys is a bad option. It's just a matter of, which one do you think is going to be the better, low owned play necessarily in tournaments. I still think even if the ownership creeps up a bit, I'm still locking Davis in at that price with that upside. I just think it's too juicy for me.
Makes sense. I mean, is there anybody else? Like, we're digging here. We're trying to dig. I honestly, I cannot find anybody else that I feel even, remotely confident in recommending. Like, Steven Sims Jr. can make some sense because Alex Smith likes to dump it off. But at the same time, Sims hasn't put up more than, he has a couple games of 8, one game with 10, one game with 9.6. But I mean, that's not what you're really looking for tournaments. Like, you need that significant upside. So maybe it's a safer play with Sims in the slot up against Sean Murphy-Bunting, who has not been good this season. But I still don't want to be like, oh, go out and play Steven Sims Jr. That's the guy that's going to win you this league. Is there anybody that you feel remotely comfortable getting behind?
I got two guys. So these are my last two values that I had circled here. I'll go with the first one, which is really out in left field, but I think there's a chance. I'm very cheap. I could potentially see playing Malcolm Brown maybe in a couple of my lineups in tournaments. He didn't do much this season, but in the 3 games that he did score a touchdown, he averaged 18.1 fantasy points. He's very cheap. It's just him and Akers that's going to be available this week. Darrell Henderson's not going to be there. So I think the potential for some goal line work, all you need is 1 or 2 cheap touchdowns, and you could get a little bit of return on investment with Malcolm Brown. So again, that's a little bit out in left field, but
no, I like it. Like, I don't know how much you understand that I love this take. Because Seattle, I've been talking about it all year, they're actually really good up against the running back in yards per carry allowed. I did most of the research prior to, I believe, week 12 it was. However, they're only allowing 3.91 yards per carry, which has increased over the past 2 weeks. That's even better news for this take. And sitting there and looking at it, the last time in week 10 when they played, Malcolm Brown punched it in for 2 carries. 2 carries for 2 touchdowns. But you want to know the biggest thing is the fact that they've allowed 13 touchdowns on the season. So I went back and I tracked it. And like I said, this was I believe week 12, right before they played the Eagles, because I think this is a Miles Sanders research type thing. Sitting there and looking at it, they are really bad at goal line defense up against the running back. And I don't know why. I mean, looking at their they had, I believe it was something like, let's see, 5, 7. It was they had 10 touchdowns. This was the week. It was 9 out of their 10 touchdowns were allowed within the 5-yard line. So sitting there and looking at it, the Seahawks suck at goal line defense. So if the Rams do slowly pound it down into the red zone, Malcolm Brown, who is the goal line back over there, could end up getting the carries. If they want to try and make sure that Cam Akers is healthy, if they don't want to, tweak his ankle, trying to put pressure on it to move the pile, it makes just so much sense. And so I do like Malcolm Brown a lot. He is definitely a dart throw for sure. Like, I don't want to make a bunch of lineups around him, but he makes sense as a cheaper option at the running back position. If you end up playing a whole bunch of wide receivers in the flex position as well, and you still need a cheap option at the running back position, your second one. Who else you got?
For sure, man. So my last one is, and again, I'm not sure how chalky this one's going to end up being. I think this probably is going to be a more popular, lower price play. I really do love J.D. McKissick this week. I think everything kind of sets up for him to have a great game. Tampa Bay is allowing the fewest rushing yards per game to running backs this season. Antonio Gibson, we know, is probably going to play, but he's a little bit banged up with the toe issue. We're not sure about the quarterback situation, as we talked about in Washington. McKissick caught 80 balls this year. So
that's crazy, right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. He came into the season with 70 receptions, in his career, and
What year is this for him? 6?
I think it's 4 or 5, maybe.
Is it? That makes sense. I didn't expect him to be that young, but yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, he caught 80 balls this year. Just in his last 5 games, he's averaging just shy of 7 receptions. I think this sets up nicely. They're, almost they're 8.5-point dogs. McKissick's probably going to see some check down work. They're probably going to be playing some hurry up, playing from behind. I really think he's a much better play than Antonio Gibson, who I'm absolutely fading this week. But McKissick is going to see a lot of exposure for me.
So I don't know if you know this or not. I don't know if you listen to all my shows, but I am the passing or the receiving running back guru. Like, I look at these matchups to a T. And this is something that, everybody's sitting there saying, who was it? Edmonds up against Dallas. Oh, and it was McKissick up against Dallas. I believe this was Thanksgiving weekend when they played the first time. So then I'm like, you don't play pass catching running backs up against Washington. Up against Dallas. Like, Dallas has a terrible core when it comes to stopping the running back, but that's on the ground. In the air, they're phenomenal. And so sitting there looking at these aspects, and I actually have it in my head, but I can't put it on an Excel sheet because I have no idea how to work Excel like in the formulas. I could literally build a formula if I could get somebody, come in and build it for me, as to how to tell when to play pass catching running backs. This is a week where you play pass catching running backs. And, I'm not going to sit here for an hour and bore the hell out of people to the point where we have no listeners left. But I will say that the fact of, the volume that is received on a regular basis, the percentage of time that Alex Smith checks it down, and the fact that the Buccaneers have allowed 8 receptions, 9 receptions, 6 receptions, and 5 receptions over the past 4 games is absolutely just juicy. Meanwhile, in those games, looking at it, it's about 200 yards, a little bit over 200 yards or so allowed in those 4 games. So 50 yards, right? And if we take those numbers, we're looking at, 28, so almost 30 receptions. We're talking about, 7 points receiving and 5 points in the yardage department. They haven't allowed a touchdown, which is a little bit disappointing. But, just those 12 bonus fantasy points allowed, that's huge. That's huge. And McKissick can find the end zone one time. Just find it for one time. Just once, McKissick. It just makes too much sense. Do you have his price in front of you? Yeah, he's sitting there 48. Like, yeah. Give me McKissick, baby.
Yep.
Like, give me McKissick at 48. Like, you're sitting there, you're already getting value back essentially if he scores those 12 points, which I think he's more than capable of doing. Let's look at his scoring real quick. He's sitting there at, let's see, 28 fantasy points last week, but it wasn't his game, right? 23 fantasy points, 26 fantasy points, 10.6, but 17.8. Like, he's on fire, especially since Antonio Gibson went down. So McKissick for me, yeah, absolutely give it to me. You can't run up against Tampa Bay. You really can't. So sitting there and looking at it, I absolutely love that call. Anybody else for us?
Did you say you don't do defenses a lot? Because there's one defense that I circled that I really like this week.
Let's talk defense.
I love Seattle this week. They're the cheapest play on FanDuel. Are they the same on DraftKings? Are they the cheapest option on there as well?
No, I don't believe so. They're third Fourth.
Okay.
They're fourth.
Okay. I mean, it just, to me, it doesn't make sense not to play Seattle this week. We know the uncertainty we talked about at quarterback for the Rams. It's cheap to play Seattle. 5 of the last 6 games, they've scored at least 9 fantasy points. Over the last 6 weeks, 7 turnovers forced, 21 sacks. I mean, those are big numbers. I mean, you pull up, I think something that's misleading a lot of the time is you pull up these, there you go. So, $2,700, and you pull up these things and you get the green and the red, next to the opponent rank. And I think that's a little bit misleading for Seattle, just because they started the year out so poorly, just giving up everything. I mean, the defense was non-existent, but as of late, they've just really, really turned it on. And so I think that's misleading to just take it at first glance and say, wow, this is a bad matchup, and Seattle's defense is nothing to play. They're my favorite defense play of the week, even more so than Tampa Bay against Washington.
Yeah, I have a ton of shares of Seattle from the lineups I've already built. This is something as to where I honestly believe it could end up being a massive play. I was going to build a lineup with you. Do you have time to build a lineup?
Let's do it, brother.
Sounds good. If you could inform us in the chat what's going on in the news so we can build this lineup for everybody. I'm not going to have time to do it. Let's build a lineup. All right, so we're going to start out with the studs, right? Just like how we talked about. This is how we build lineups. This is how we, for these small slates, this is how we do it. We got to start out with the studs, right?
Yep.
So sitting there and looking at it, Jonathan Taylor, right off the bat, even with the questionable tag, his list is limited, but he's going to play. He's absolutely going to play. We got to start with Jonathan Taylor, right? Is that your favorite player on the slate?
That's my favorite play. Lock it in.
All right, let's do it. Then let's just go with Diggs, right? Do you want to get the chalky route or do you want to go the not chalky route? I'm going to let you do it. You tell me who you want to play. Based off of what we talked about. Do we want to sit there and want to go the Jonathan Taylor route? I mean, the Josh Allen route, or do we want to go the Phillip Rivers route?
I think let's fade Diggs. I think it's more fun to go against the chalk. So let's fade Diggs and let's get Godwin in there.
All right, let's do that. We got it.
And then I think if we're doing Phillip Rivers, let's roll down, and I think we're both in agreement. Zach Paschall's going to be your best play for.
I like that take. We got it. So we're going to go the Phillip Rivers route, or we can still go Zach Paschall with the Josh Allen route.
You know what? Let's do Phillip Rivers. Let's see how the lineup shakes out.
Okay, let's do it. All right, so we got that in there. Dude, we're sitting real pretty with that 5,200. And you said Seattle's your favorite defense. I like Seattle this week, regardless of what happens. Let's go ahead and plug in Seattle. Right? I like Washington too, but would you rather go Seattle over Washington?
I'm locking Seattle in.
All right, let's do it.
And then I say go ahead and I'm playing Logan Thomas. I think we're in agreement for that one as well, right? That's definitely chalk that I want to go for.
Logan Thomas, we are locking you in. All right, so we got pretty much our base lineup that we talked about. We're sitting there, we're looking at, other running backs, and we have McKissick as an option. We've got Naim Heinz, who we both liked. But are we going to sit there and we're going to depend on 4 players for the Colts? Do we think it's going to be that high of scoring? And if so, why are we sitting there and fading Buffalo's Diggs at this point?
Well, that's the thing. I think we can go ahead and put McKissick in there. And honestly, I think we're going to end up with enough salary at the end to have the Rivers and Paschall stack and still be able to afford Diggs at the end. So I think we're sitting pretty with the amount of money we got left.
Well, all we need is flex now at 5,900 if we plug in Diggs. That's a lot. That is a lot. Cam Akers, maybe? Or you want to fade that? Because we got the Seattle team.
Yeah, I'm going to fade Akers. I actually really like Ronald Jones this week. I really think.
Really?
I really do.
Okay, let's go with it. Tell us why you like Ronald Jones, because we never got to talk about him.
No, we didn't. I know Washington's a little bit tougher of a matchup as far as the defense goes, but it's going to be easier, I think, for Tampa Bay to get the run game going than it is to get the pass game going. I like Tampa Bay's defense just behind Seattle's defense as the best play for the week. So I think Tampa Bay's defense is – I really think they're going to shut Washington down. And I think they're going to get some favorable field position, which sets up Jones to eat the clock. And as we mentioned, I think this is not going to be Brady's game. This sets up more as a Tampa Bay running game for me.
Yeah, that's brutal, man. All right, let's go ahead and lock this lineup in. I like this lineup. This is a smash play for me. I appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you very much.
No, thanks for having me, brother. It's been a blast.
Where can we find you? Like, if we want to find you on Twitter, where do we go?
You can find me on Twitter at Zach, Z-A-K, the Monster, all one word.
Yeah, appreciate you for coming on, man. And make sure you guys go check us out over there on Fantasy Intervention. We appreciate all you guys. And thank you all for letting us intervene with your fantasy football life. We're out.
See you, man. Thanks.